Hi there and welcome back. This is Critical Theory Part 2. I thought I could squeeze it all into Part 1, but I was wrong. We got a couple more theories to look at in this video, and we'll also get a quick introduction to Charlotte Perkins Gilman. That way you'll have all the videos and all the materials for this week ready to go. So we left off at Marxist Criticism, and Marxist criticism comes out of the writings and philosophy of Karl Marx, who, of course, coined the term communism and talked about it as a form of government in reaction to and as a response to the inequities of capitalism. Now, whatever you may think about it as a political term, whether you think it'd be a good idea for America or any other nation be communist or not, that's kind of besides the point of the theory. I'll also encourage you to make sure that you don't necessarily confuse fascist and dictatorial regimes that call themselves communist in name, but really don't follow the theory. Russia claimed it was communist, but it did not. It had a very unequal distribution of wealth and land and means of production. And you say the same thing about contemporary China too, and Cuba as well. I mean, the whole idea behind, one of the large ideas behind communism is all property, like all land, is shared. And in that, people work together to give people what they need to live and what is needed given their particular individual circumstances. Anyway, it is controversial. But, this planet has never seen communism realized at the national level. So let me get to the actual critical theory. So at its core, it's really about factors of economic policy and social economic class struggle affect the creation of a work of literature and also the interpretation of a work of literature. If you think about it, literature takes a certain amount of capital to produce and beyond that point to distribute. If you were in 75A, you'll remember that the earliest writings that we were looking at in North America tended to be exploration journals or settlement journals. People weren't, writing the great American novel. There wasn't a whole lot of fiction going on there because people were just trying to survive. You have to have a lot of needs being met before you go into fiction and literature. Poetry is kind of a different story, but still, because it's smaller. Now, there are two main terms that are used in Marxist criticism. If you've taken political philosophy or politics, you may know them already. The owners of the means of production, and that means basically the 1%. The very few people who own the vast majority of land, of production sites like factories, and wealth. If you own those things, you're pretty much set. And if you're not an owner of the mean of production, you're a worker. It means that in general, you are working for those other people in some capacity, according to Marxist criticism. So, unless you happen to be a trust fund baby and you don't really need to be in school, but you're just doing it for fun or you're slumming, you are a member of the workers or the working class, as am I. I mean, there are a lot of different layers and substrata we could talk about in there, but we all have to work for a living. I got to keep paying the mortgage and all that kind of stuff. So here I am. I'm not independently wealthy. I can't just sit around and let interest or dividends accumulate and live off of that. So again, thinking about how these two groups interact in a work of literature or how they affected the production of that literature or the dissemination of that literature, those issues are at the heart of Marxist criticism. And like all these critical theories, we're going to mainly apply them to literature. But of course, any cultural artifact, can have these theories applied to them. And I talked about that with film a little bit, but music, art, video games, all of these things. And I actually got a comic that is Marxist criticism. It's from one of my favorite online comics called Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, or SMBC.com. He does these comics that are all about, like, sometimes they're about science or AI or love or relationships. They're all over the map, or literature. There's some really funny ones about Moby Dick. But here's this one right here. So you've got these two Norsemen. They're complaining here and it's snowing. This one starts off with blasphemy. I'll try to do like a good, Scandinavian accent. I don't think I got this one. Christ in heaven, a second winter and springtime, the crops, Hans, all gone, and my children will eat grass. Why? And then Hans over here saying, word from the far north is that two princesses are struggling to discover the meaning of sisterhood. And here's the little commentary that'll help this make sense. Proposal: every Disney movie should be remade from the perspective of the proletariat. So basically, what it's doing is applying Marxist criticism to the movie Frozen. Now, proletariat, I should have mentioned earlier, that's another word for worker. Person that's in this 99% group like you and I. So basically, according to the plot of the Frozen movie, these two girls are trying to reconnect, and it's making all of the weather go haywire, and it's snowing, and there are two winters. And here are these poor, two farmers just trying to make a living and stuff like that. Well, there's these two princesses that are causing all of this to happen, And again, we may not stop to think about it that way, but it does put an interesting perspective on these things. And if you think about it, like, how many Disney stories are about somebody who's from an aristocratic family, from that 1%, a princess or a prince or a king, somebody of vast wealth and power. It can make you think about things differently. Even happens in some of the Star Wars movies and The Rise of Skywalker, when they go to that gambling plan and they find out these rich people, are really funding the Empire and the Rebellion, or the First Order and the Resistance. And I could go on for ages. There's a really good show on Amazon Prime, if you like science fiction, called The Expanse, and it's based off of a set of books. And it basically is this Marxist critique about space exploration. People that live on Earth, and they're very rich people terraforming Mars, but they need people living in this asteroid belt to mine minerals and water for both of them. So that becomes an issue of class struggle. I could go on, but we've got a couple more to hit. Let's go. Finally, cultural criticism. Now, cultural criticism is all about looking at a literary text as a cultural artifact, as a product of its times. And cultural criticism can often interweave together other critical theories: feminism, Marxism, biography, ruins of psychoanalysis too. It can get jumbly sometimes if people try to throw in everything and don't make strategic choices, but it can help you see how a lot of these theories have certain intersections in our culture. So the text, that piece of literature you're looking at, is seen as a product or a commentary on the cultural moment in which the text was created. So when we read Souls of Black Folk or Up From Slavery, we understand that, and we can use cultural criticism to talk about it, talk about the cultural moment in which those texts were created. In other words, what about that historical moment, that physical place, and that specific time and the culture that swirled around it helped make that happen. Or it could be about the cultural moment which the text represents. Sometimes we know that really important works of literature portray some other time. Especially in Romanicist or dark Romanicist literature. If you look at Edgar Allan Poe, he often writes about things that have happened in some kind of amorphous past. Or if you've ever read, say, like The Scarlet Letter or Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne, both of those represent early Puritan America, which is 150 years away from when Hawthorne was actually writing those texts. So it's another fascinating field. Now, speaking of fascinating, we'll move on and give a quick but really crucial introduction to Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Wow, I cannot speak today. Now, what do we need to know about her? She's often regarded as one of America's most significant early feminists, especially in the 19th century. And her work with drama, with fiction especially, helps to cement that claim. But she did have various careers before, settling on writing. She was an art teacher, a greeting card designer, a governess. That's another word for, like, say, a nanny, or an au pair. But au pair is kind of an East Coast term. Other thing is very significant. She struggled throughout her life with depression, and even worse than her depression were the cures that were administered to her. Isolation, no books, no art supplies, no pen, no paper, nothing. And this gets represented in the Yellow Wallpaper. It's a very autobiographical story that she writes. And we're talking about the foundations of psychology happening, but they're extremely patriarchal. And they are extremely damaging and extremely condescending to women in a way that contemporary psychological treatment and therapy is not. Extremely sexist. And she has a really fantastic book that came out just at the turn of the century called In Women and Economics. And there she talks about this really important, crucial point that women's dependence on men, their subservience to men, hurt both men and women. And it hurt humanity as a whole. And notice she puts forward an idea that we've seen in other places in this class and also in 75A. We saw this in Margaret Fuller's writings, if you were in that class. We also saw it in Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery. He says that slavery not only hurts the slave, but the slave owner. It hurts them both. It makes the slave owner, hobbled and crippled and less independent as well. And there's a similar or analogous argument going on between the sexes here in Charlotte Perkins Gilman's work. I should just say Gilman's, but it doesn't sound right to me. And she did end up developing breast cancer. And gosh, if psychology was bad and psychotherapy was bad at the time, cancer treatments were virtually non-existent. She fell into such a depression that she committed suicide in 1935. And her death, of course, was a huge loss to American literature. It's important to keep in mind, too, that if there had been equitable psychotherapy treatment for women, she might not have committed suicide. If you think about it, women were treated as essentially hysterical creatures, not having rational facilities equal to men. In fact, the word hysteria comes from the Greek word for uterus, and it's also the root we see in hysterectomy. That was considered to be the seat of women's unhinged emotional state. us up to time.